Have you ever been in a room and felt like you didn't belong there? Like everyone else seemed more confident, more capable, more qualified, and you were just trying to keep up? You don't say it out loud, but internally the thought's there. I don't measure up. I'm not as good as they are. I don't belong here. And the truth is that feeling shows up in more places than we'd probably like to admit. At work, in leadership, in relationships, and even in our faith. And we carry it quietly, that sense of being less than or not enough. If you've ever felt like that, then this episode's for you. Welcome to Faith in the Friction, a podcast about finding strength, resilience, and hope in difficult places. I'm Sean Smith here in T.W. Lewis Studio 42, and today we're talking about something many of us struggle with, but very few of us often name. It's that internal voice that tells you you're not enough. And here's what I've learned. Feeling less than is rarely about reality, it's about narrative. It's a story we tell ourselves, shaped by experiences, reinforced by comparison, and repeated until it feels like truth. And one of the biggest drivers of that narrative is comparison. We look around, we measure ourselves against other people, their success, their confidence, their progress, and we quietly conclude, I'm not enough. But comparison doesn't reveal truth, it distorts it. Let's take a look at this in the Bible. There's a moment in John 21 that speaks directly to this. And Peter's just been restored by Jesus. He's been given purpose and direction. Jesus has said to him, "Feed my sheep." And almost immediately, he looks at someone else. He looks over to John, or as John describes himself in the gospel, the disciple whom Jesus loved. I love how John describes himself that way. Peter looks over at him and says, "What about him?" And Jesus responds, "What is it to you? You follow me." That's the moment. Peter had clarity, purpose, and direction, and comparison pulled him out of it. Comparison distracts him from the purpose that Jesus had given him, but Jesus brings him back. That's not your assignment. You follow me. Since so many of us struggle with feeling like this, like we are less than, let me give you 4 practices that I think can help move past the feeling like you're not enough and into the purpose that God has set for you. The first of these practices is to identify the lie. If you're going to deal with feeling less than, you have to start here. You have to identify what you're actually telling yourself. Because most of the time, we don't realize it, but it's running in the background. I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. They're better than me. And those repeated thoughts start to feel like the truth. But not every thought you have is true. Some are shaped by comparison, some by past experiences, and some are simply lies. When I was in college, I worked as a teller at a bank. And occasionally, people would hand me counterfeit bills. Now, I don't think I ever encountered anybody who actually made counterfeit bills, but they'd just gotten them from being in circulation or something. And as a teller in the bank, when I recognized them, I had to confiscate them, take away their money. And what's interesting is that we never trained by studying counterfeits. They never sat us down and showed us counterfeit bills and said, here are the fake ones, memorize these, learn what these look like. We were trained to know the real bills so well that anything fake stood out. The weight, the texture, the markings. When you know the real thing, the counterfeit becomes obvious. And that's how this works for us too. You don't get free from lies by obsessing over them. You get free by becoming deeply familiar with the truth. So ask yourself, What am I believing right now? And then ask, what is actually true? What does God say about you? Not what comparison says, not what insecurity says, not what your worst moments say. What does truth say? Take some time to know deeply what is true about you. Think about those people you trust, those who are close to you that know you really well. What do they have to say about you? Listen to those voices. Listen to the one who created you. Focus on the truth of who you are, because when you know the truth well enough, the lie loses its authority. The second practice is replacing comparison with calling. Peter's issue wasn't lack of direction. Jesus had already told him what to do: feed my sheep. That's clarity, that's calling. But almost immediately, Peter looks sideways. What about him? And that's what comparison does. It pulls your attention away from your calling and places it on someone else's. And when that happens, you don't just lose focus, you lose confidence. Because now you're trying to measure yourself against something that you were never meant to be measured by. I've experienced this firsthand. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Oxford University to be a part of a research group that was studying sacred values as a motivation for violence. Now, sitting around this table with me were actual anthropologists, scholars, experts in their fields. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't belong here. I'm not an academic. I'm a pastor. And in that moment, instead of leaning into what I actually brought to the table, I started trying to fit into what they brought. I felt like I needed to sound like them, think like them, contribute in the same way that they did, so they would see me as one of them. And because of that, I lost something. I lost my voice. I had a deep, real-world understanding of sacred values, not just academically, but from walking with people, seeing how belief shapes behavior, how values drive decisions, how identity influences action. I had something meaningful to contribute, but I didn't bring it because I was focused on what they were called to instead of what I was called to. And that's the danger of comparison. It doesn't just distract you, it diminishes you. Let me say that one more time. The danger of comparison is that it doesn't just distract you, it diminishes you. It pulls you out of your lane and into someone else's. And the result is you don't become more like them, you become less like you. And that's exactly what Jesus is correcting in Peter. What are you worried about that for? You follow me. In other words, that's not your assignment. That's not your responsibility. That's not your calling. You follow me. So here's the question you have to come back to. What has God actually called you to? What has he asked of you in this season, in this moment, not in 5 years, not in someone else's life, but in your life? Because you can't be faithful to your calling while you're chasing someone else's. And the more clarity you have about your calling, the less power comparison has over your identity. So that brings us to the third practice that I want to share with you, and that is stop borrowing other people's measures. This is where a lot of the less than feeling actually takes root, not in reality, but in how you're measuring it. Because most of us don't intentionally define success. We absorb it from what we see, what we scroll, what gets celebrated around us. And without realizing it, we start grading our lives with someone else's rubric. Their success becomes our standard. Their progress becomes our timeline. The outcomes they have become our expectation. And when we don't match it, we feel like we're falling short or failing. But here's the problem. You were never meant to measure your life by someone else's metrics because you weren't given their assignment. You were given yours. And when you borrow someone else's measure, you will always feel like you're losing, even when you're actually being faithful. So let's make this practical. You need to redefine what success looks like in your life, not based on visibility or speed, not based on comparison, but based on faithfulness. Am I doing what God has asked me to do? Am I growing? Am I showing up with integrity? Am I taking the next step that's out in front of me? Because success in the kingdom is not measured by how far ahead you are. It's measured by how faithful you are. And when you start measuring your life that way, something shifts. You stop feeling less than because you're no longer trying to win a race that you were never assigned to run. And the fourth practice that we can use is act anyway. This is where all of this comes together, because feeling less than doesn't just stay in your thoughts. Feeling not enough doesn't just sit there. It shapes your behavior. You hesitate. You hold back. You stay quiet. You don't take a step forward, not because you can't, but because you don't feel like you should. And over time, that hesitation becomes a pattern. Opportunities pass, growth stalls, confidence shrinks, not because you lack ability, but because you're waiting for a feeling that may never come. But here's the truth. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It's a result of action. You don't wait until you feel ready. You move. You act anyway, and readiness begins to form. You speak, and your voice strengthens. You lead, and your confidence grows. You step forward, and your identity begins to catch up. So practically, what does that look like? It looks like taking the next step, even when your internal voice says you're not enough. It looks like contributing in meetings. It looks like even when you feel out of place, saying yes to the opportunity, even when you're unsure of the outcomes, not recklessly, not pretending, but faithfully, because your identity is not confirmed by how you feel. It's shaped by what you do in faith. And every time you act anyway, you weaken the lie and you strengthen the truth. This has been a very real part of my story. For most of my life, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be here. Like at some point, someone would figure it out, that I wasn't this guy, that I didn't belong. And that voice still shows up. Almost daily, I have to fight those lies. I have to remind myself of the truth. And I've learned something. Those voices, those lies, they don't go away before you move. You move and those voices get quieter. Not because you suddenly feel different, but because you start to see that you're not here by accident. So listen, if you're feeling less than right now, if you're feeling like you're not enough, you don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to measure up. You don't have to keep comparing. Jesus' words still apply to you. What does that matter to you? You follow me. That's your lane. That's your calling. That's your focus. You are not less than. You are more than enough, the Bible says. Let me say that again. You are not less than. Maybe you're just looking in the wrong direction. Maybe you're just listening to the wrong voices. Thanks for listening to Faith in the Friction. If this episode has encouraged you, please share it with someone else who might need to hear it. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.